Stephen Hofstetter has been the director of the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department for the past 4 years. Prior to taking on his role, Stephen worked as the Natural Resources Program Manager and Senior Environmental Planner for the department and has been in the department for 21 years. Prior to moving to Alachua County, he worked 6 years at the Miami-Dade Department of Environmental Resources Management in the Wetlands Division and as the program manager for their Environmentally Endangered Lands program. A native of Florida, Stephen holds a master's degree in biology from Eastern Kentucky University and a Bachelor of Science in Zoology and certificate in environmental studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is a past board member and president of the Florida Local Environmental Resource Agency and a past board member of the Alachua Audubon Society. When not working, you can often find him hiking our preserves, leading birding trips, and enjoying our local parks. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm glad that you get out in the environment. You don't just keep it safe.
I do, I try.
You know, I was thinking about environmental protection and going to your website just to prepare for this, and I came across your mission. And I thought it was a really nice, clear, succinct mission statement. It reads, "To support a community ethic of environmental resiliency and responsible environmental stewardship of the water, air, and living resources in Alachua County." And I know you have 5 pillars or programs that help you accomplish that mission. Can you start by telling us what those programs are?
Sure, Mark. We have 5 programs, as you mentioned. 4 of them have been in existence for over 30 years. And that's the Natural Resources Division, Water Resources, Petroleum, and Hazardous Materials. And I can go into a little detail about all of those. The 5th program is one of our pillars of success, and that's the Land Conservation Program, which started in 2000. Right. But all the others were in existence in the 90s, and the department started in the 1980s.
1980s, so you're around 45, pushing 50 years old.
That's right, the department is, yes.
The department. and you, maybe
right.
You are too, Stephen.
That is true.
Well, can we kind of break the programs down one at a time? So water resources and natural resources. I know water is a huge part of what you do.
Yeah, water is a great one to start with because we often have a philosophy in our department is it all starts with water. Right. Water is something we all vitally need to have a sustainable community, quality of life, and we have incredible surface waters here in our lakes, rivers, creeks, and probably most notably our springs. Right. So making sure we're protecting that water is vital. And the other aspect is our groundwater, and that's where we get our drinking water out of the Florida aquifer below us. And so our programming for the Water Resources Division is really tied to making sure we're covering all those aspects. And we're doing it in a multi-phased approach. We do it first through education and outreach, educating the community about where their water comes from, first of all, right. As well as the benefits of why it's so important to protect these resources. Following that education and outreach concept, we offer incentives and research opportunities where we're investigating the issues that are affecting our water bodies and our water resources. But we provide opportunities for citizens, for businesses, for homeowners to get rebates on things like septic tank improvements, irrigation improvements, and so we provide a lot of these opportunities for money savings as well as water resource. And then finally, and this is true with most of our program, we have a backstop of regulatory protection. So should things go wrong or should someone be doing something that's harmful to the environment, we have a regulatory line of approach to address those issues.
You know, it's funny, just I think yesterday we posted a major social media campaign on irrigation. We're coming into the rainy season, so speaking of that regulatory backstop, we have some watering restrictions when it comes to watering lawns. But what I like is it's not all about the regulations. You all do a really fine job of communicating the why we do what we do. But Now, also wetlands protection is a big part of what you do, and that's one of the areas where there are no kind of lines in the county. Is that correct? Some things you do countywide.
That is correct, and that wetland aspect is kind of covered with our natural resource division, which I hadn't talked about much, but we've had really strong wetland protection measures in place since the early 90s. And in 2000, with an update of our comprehensive plan, we increased those protections. We increased the buffer requirements to those wetlands and strengthened the requirement to avoid those wetlands. Through that process, we were very successful. We literally, since the 2000s, have only impacted a few acres of wetlands. And that's a pretty amazing feat with the amount of development we've seen in this community. In about 2018, we using the county charter, we took an opportunity to expand wetland protection countywide. So now, as you mentioned, it doesn't matter where you are in the county, we have now the same consistent wetland protection standards in our municipalities as well as our in the unincorporated area. And that was done through our county commission and the support of the municipalities as well.
So when there's development review or something going on, whether it's in the unincorporated area or in a city, EPD's involvement in that is required.
Yes. So we do a little. We approach it a little different depending on whether it's in the municipality or in the unincorporated. In the unincorporated area, we can go through our development review process to make sure we're protecting those wetlands. In the city, we first help them identify where those wetlands are, make sure they avoid them, and then we don't necessarily participate in their development review process. We've helped them through to make sure they're meeting those countywide regulations before they even start development, which is a major part of how we approach development in Alachua County.
I see. And for those who don't know, I mean, the importance of the wetland. You talked earlier about, the aquifer below us is our drinking water. Wetlands act as nature's kind of filter. Can you, without going into too much technical information,
sure.
Can you tell us the importance of wetlands?
Yeah, so wetlands, to me, they almost represent nature's perfect approach to water quality protection and other features. So a wetland has incredible capacity for storage. So during floods, it's the place where water goes, and it has an incredible capacity to hold water during floods. During droughts, it's often the last place you find water. So it's really critical for wildlife to be able to find water during those really stressful times. In addition to dealing with water and flooding issues, it can hold and store carbon. It can take in pollutants. So it cleans and purifies, as you mentioned. It's kind of the kidney of our natural functions. And so they're able to hold carbon in the soil. They're able to purify the water as it passes through the system. And they provide an incredible opportunity for wildlife as well. So a lot of our hunting and enjoyment of bird watching, for instance, we do that in a lot of our wetland systems like Payne's Prairie and so on. And then finally, they have an ability to impact our climate. They often are cooler. They're able to, if they're forested, they release a lot of oxygen, taking a lot of carbon, and can cool general areas and to keep temperatures from rising. So they can really play an important role there as well.
I'm always amazed at the diversity of funding that you get in environmental protection, and I know in the water protection side of this, it seems like we get a great deal of grant money to help with public education. Is that correct? Yes,
we a lot of the programming is designed around getting funds from the state, either through grants or contracts or some kind of agreement. And to give you an example, our budget in our department is about $4 to $5 million a year. And if you take out the $12 million that Wild Spaces Public Places gets annually, yet we only use about a third of that money is coming from the general fund. Everything else is coming from, grants, contracts, agreements, and there's other funding sources. So we really try hard to find other money to help, further extend the money that our citizens are providing us.
I kind of transitioned when I brought up wetlands into the land conservation and the kind of natural resource management. But why don't we go ahead and move into that? You mentioned land conservation, thanks to our very generous voters who 4 times have voted to tax themselves to conserve land. So talk to us about the Natural Resource Division, and that includes land conservation, and kind of what we're doing. We did do an interview recently with Andy Chrisman, the land conservation manager, but talk to us about that aspect of your department.
Sure. So as you mentioned, that program started in 2000 with the very first referendum, and like you said, we've had 3 since. The last one in 2022, and to date, we have over 34,000 acres preserved, which is incredible. 22 preserves, 85 miles of trails, and again, we have a lot of partnerships with that. About 1/3 of our funds have come from partners, so we're able to stretch that dollar with every property we've been able to purchase. We've been able to utilize, partnerships.
And that could be the state. It could be other conservation nonprofits.
Yeah, nonprofits. It could even be donations from citizens. And one thing to remember about this program, it's a willing seller program. So really, it's it's the citizens that are providing these opportunities to purchase these lands, and it's really the citizens are really keeping this program going. So we're excited. I think last year we had the most purchases of land we've had in the 24 years of the program, and I think we're on that trajectory. We're going to continue to have success, and it's exciting to see these properties become available to citizens to enjoy, and that they're properly protected in perpetuity. In addition to that, we do have conservation easements, which is another aspect of the program as well, and we've been working more and more on that conservation easement side of things as well.
And just so our viewers understand that, the owner gets to keep their land, but what they are basically selling is the future development rights. Is that correct?
That's the typical approach. So in a conservation easement, it's a partnership with the owner. They retain ownership of the land, and then they sell off certain potential rights, and typically those are development rights. And so it reduces the cost for us, and it's kind of a win-win for both. The property owner gets to retain often ag activities or other activities on the land, and we purchase those development rights so that land is protected in perpetuity.
Now, one of the pillars is water resources, natural resources. Is there more to talk about on the natural resources side of this?
There's the upland side of this. Yeah, so we have significant habitat, listed species habitat. That's habitat that supports rare species. We have something called strategic ecosystems, which I'll mention in a minute. We have significant geological features, as like Devil's Millhopper. We have these incredible cave systems and sinkholes, and then we have floodplain protection as well. So strategic ecosystems is kind of our gold standard for our most sensitive and large connected wild areas in the county. And in the 1990s, we had a study done that identified about 47 of these sites throughout the county. And they range from a very small one that's about 50 acres, but the majority of them are hundreds of acres to thousands of acres in size. And so any areas that are identified to be strategic ecosystems, we ground truth them to verify the sensitivity of the resources there. But once we do that, we can limit and protect up to 50% of those resources while still providing development additional incentives. So it's a kind of a win-win for the developer and for our resources. And I believe we've been very successful with that program over the years. But it's unique to Alachua County. It's a term that we have in our comprehensive planning code that we use to recognize these really sensitive resources.
And these are areas that have, to become a designated that, there have to be some, remarkable features that what are some of the things that create a strategic ecosystem? Wetlands, I assume, is one of them.
Sure. Wetlands that have good habitat components integrated with them. A lot of them are creek systems. The Santa Fe River is actually our #1 rated strategic ecosystem.
That entire thing?
The entire thing up there. So for our lands program, that's their #1 priority, is to try to purchase land along the Santa Fe River. They can range from a very sensitive resource like a cave system. That would be an example of that 50-acre site. But they could also be very large expanses of green space, pine plantations that are providing wildlife corridors on the east side of the county for the Florida Wildlife Corridor, for instance. So they can range from large, big and green and wild to very sensitive and small.
I see. Okay. Let's see, we have other pillars too. I've been particularly interested in the petroleum tank remediation program. And I know you guys have been doing this for years, and I know it has expanded over the years. So tell us about the genesis of that program.
Sure. In fact, that's one of the original parts of the department, was the concern with pollution and contamination of our water. And petroleum is one of those substances. 1 gallon of petroleum can contaminate 1 million gallons of water. So it becomes really critical when we do have a spill to address that concern quickly and to try to keep it from getting into our drinking water.
And we've had some dramatic incidents in the last couple of years.
We have.
That I know you all have responded to.
We have, and I can talk about that. So the program's been in existence since the late 80s, early 90s, and we've been very successful. In fact, we pretty much cleaned up a lot of what's in Alachua County. The state recognized that, and also another point about this program, it's completely funded with state funds, and that's the funds that come in. It's a tax that's on petroleum products that are brought into the state of Florida. So all of the funding for this program is completely funded by the state, yet we're providing great local jobs and assistance to our businesses locally with that fund.
Right.
So we successfully at the beginning dealt with Alachua County. They were appreciative of the efforts we were making, so we began to grow. And now that program is currently for the compliance side, and this is the side that goes out and inspects facilities that have tanks to keep them so that they don't leak. We're 16 counties in size.
Really?
So we stretch all the way up to Georgia and to each, east and west coast. So it's pretty incredible. In fact, we have 4 inspectors for that program. None of them live in Alachua County. So we're efficient and effective in that. We want them to be close to those. We have 1,800 facilities that they're inspecting between those 16 counties. So we're all over the northeast of Florida dealing with that.
And does this program include when you identify tanks that are no longer in use and have to be removed? Are you part of that process?
It does, yeah. If we recognize those, we assist in getting those taken out. The other half of that program, it's actually a 7-county area. That program is about the cleanup of, unfortunately, when we do have contamination. And a lot of these gas stations, particularly gas stations that were built in the 80s or earlier, had single-wall tanks. And unfortunately, those tanks, almost all of them are leaking. So we're addressing kind of a historical problem we have, particularly on interstates and so on. So that's a 7-county area, and we have about 325 sites that we're working on right now to clean up. And last year we had a good year. We closed on 22 of those sites.
Really? Now, speaking of chemicals and hazardous chemicals, I've heard a lot of discussion coming from your shop lately about PFAS and those forever chemicals. What is the concern there, and tell us what's going on in those discussions right
Sure.
now.
So the last program we haven't hit on is hazardous materials. Right. And hazardous materials they kind of capture all the other chemicals that are potentially hazardous to humans. So we have a list of those, and we have 1,200 facilities in Alachua County that have hazardous materials, either through storage, they use it, or they're using it for processing and so on. So there's 1,200 of them, and we do about 400 inspections a year. And
so you get to each company about once every 3 years?
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing?
that's the goal. It's once every 3 years, and that program is completely funded through the fees to be part of that program. So that's another program where we diversify funding opportunities. Right. And that group also responds to emergency. They're the 24/7 emergency response. So when
truck turns over on the interstate, that's the group.
Yes, and we've had, as you mentioned earlier, we've had some of those recently, unfortunately, where we've had to go out and we had chemicals mixed into the back of a truck. We don't know what it is, And so we have to be very careful in removing that material. And we want to get out there quickly, make sure it's not reaching our groundwater before, and get that, if it is spilling, get that cleaned up quickly.
Is that where your guys put on the hazmat suits? Or?
We don't usually put them on. We have contractors that do that work, but we're the ones standing there with the orange vest, keeping
Tell them
traffic.
the guys in the suits.
Yes, where they need to be, and keeping our citizens away from those areas. So going back to your question on PFAS. So PFAS is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And so now you know why we call it PFAS. Yeah. It's a lot easier to remember. These are chemicals, like you said, we call them forever chemicals. And they're human-made chemicals. And these are the chemicals that we've created to be water resistant, stain resistant, fire resistant for our, so all of our cars, our couches, our carpets have these chemicals in them.
The ones that let me slide the egg around in the pan.
Right. If it's not soaking in, it probably has this chemical in it. So, and there's hundreds of these chemicals, but they've been grouped together in what we call these forever chemicals. And the chemical makeup of these, as the name describes, it's fluorine and carbon bonds, and those are the strongest bonds in organic chemistry. So you can imagine why it's so hard to get rid of these. They don't want to break up. So there's a lot of challenges in trying to deal with that. In the U.S. EPA, at the federal level, they've realized the concern that these chemicals are creating for human health concerns. So they have finally started to come up with primary drinking water standards at what we call a maximum contamination level. So if you exceed that level, there's a potential risk in the long term for human health. Mm-hmm. So they've come up with these regulatory standards. It's 10 parts per trillion or 4 parts per trillion. So those are incredibly small numbers. So that kind of lets you know how dangerous these chemicals can be. The challenge is with that small of amount of chemical in water, it's extremely hard to deal with, handle. And so the EPA has come up with these standards, but they've given the utilities that have our public water supplies 3 years to monitor and gather data, and 5 years to come up with solutions. So that's what we're looking at in the next 5 years. So by 2029, all the public water supplies, we would have tested them, and those that need to have remediation or cleanup requirements are going to have to come up with those by 2025.
And I'm almost afraid to ask, are most water systems compliant now, or does almost everyone have something to do, or somewhere in the middle? That's a great
question. So the EPA did a study, and of the 66,000 public water supply systems in the country, they think 6 to 10% are going to have to address this issue.
I see.
So that's still a big number, and there's currently 4 or 5 strategies that are out there that appear to be effective, but some of those are going to be expensive. Some of those could be done at the citizen level, so at your home.
Through filtration?
Through filtration, like granular active carbon is one material that can bind to the substance and help purify. There's others, there's reverse osmosis, there's high pressure membrane treatment. There's a lot of these complicated, and I'm not a chemist, but there's some of these techniques that are out there that the larger public systems are going to have to utilize to treat this. In addition to that, there will be a public outreach campaign to let citizens understand what their options are as well on trying to deal with these and understand what the potential impacts are from these substances.
Well, I think we've covered the pillars. I thought I would kind of fast forward in what little time we have left to talk about, I know our board has been very interested in climate change and climate study, and they are believers that while these are global issues, every community has to do what they can to do their part. So I know we've done the greenhouse gas report and the climate vulnerability analysis, but tell me kind of where we are and what's coming in the future when it comes to the climate.
Sure. So the 2 reports you mentioned, those provide us an understanding of how we're impacting climate through the greenhouse gas report. So that's identifying what kind of gases we're putting in the atmosphere, and that's what's causing this change in climate. So that's one side. The other side is the vulnerability analysis, which helps explain the impacts we're likely going to experience in the future. So we've completed those two. So now the next step is, now that we know the potential impacts we're going to be facing, how are we going to address those? So we're doing that through the development of what we call a climate action plan. So it's an action approach to mitigate the carbon impacts that we're creating in greenhouse gas, but also to develop adaptation strategies. Because regardless of what our community does, we're likely and are currently experiencing these changes in our climate. We need to be prepared for that. If we want to be economically sound, and protect our environment, and be sustainable toward the future, we need to prepare ourselves for these changes.
So these are practical kind of steps to take.
Yeah, these are going to be a combination of policy adjustments at the comprehensive plan level, to provide guidance to all of the actions we do as a government and as a community, to action items that citizens could do to do their part and be prepared for it.
And is this like when temperatures are, on average increasing, how does this affect your life, agriculture,
right,
outdoor activities, flooding?
You're hitting on all cylinders there. So what we anticipate will happen in Alachua County is increased heat overall. So for example, right now have you ever heard of heat index? That's where you take the temperature and humidity, and the combination of that is how you feel, how hot it feels to you.
Right.
That's what we call the heat index. When that heat index hits 105, it starts to become an extreme health risk to humans. Right now, about 38 days a year, we experience that kind of heat index. By the end of the century, we're going to be adding about 100 more days a year of that kind of heat. So you can imagine, 120 potentially straight days of temperatures in that. We would have to adjust the activities we do during the hottest parts of the day. We might have to adjust the sporting activities and the leisure activities we want to do to different times. But that also puts a lot of pressure on our environment, on our water resources. So heat is one of our number one concerns, both for human health impacts, mental health impacts as well. If you can't sleep at night because it's not dropping below 80 degrees, right, over time that's really going to put some mental strain on you. The next step is flooding. We aren't anticipating more rainfall overall, but we're going to have these larger events. And so flooding is the next big issue, and we're going to have to deal with that for critical infrastructure.
I think I'm going to have to invite you back for a 30-minute conversation just on this. I know it's complicated stuff, but Stephen, thank you so much for what your department and your staff does to protect our community, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.